Good evening and welcome once again to the Shadow Gallery. I am, as always, your host, James Donnelly, and I'm here to introduce a new segment that I like to call Reviewing Shit. This is basically where I review things that are not comics, but happen to be either movies or games or maybe TV shows, maybe a book, maybe some music. Unlikely that you'll get a lot more music, but who knows? But what I'm here to talk about tonight is the film that I saw tonight, which is The Cabin in the Woods. Now, I've been looking forward to this film since I first heard about it back in, I think, 2008. Now, the film, as you may know, directed by Drew Goddard, who directed Cloverfield, which is arguably arguably the best found footage film ever. It's close. It's up there with films like, obviously, Blair Witch Project is great, but it's not as good as Cloverfield. And Chronicle, that I just recently also saw, was also pretty fantastic. But anyway. But Drew Goddard, and was written by Goddard and Joss Whedon. And you may know him from, doing things like, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, Firefly, Dollhouse. And, he's directing this movie that's coming out in a couple weeks called The Avengers. You probably heard of that, too. I'm sorry, he wrote and directed that. He rewrote the script. Anyway, but he's an Oscar nominee, I believe, maybe an Oscar winner, because I think that, I know that he was nominated for co-writing Toy Story, the first Toy Story, but anyway. And as I'm sure that most of you know, that Joss Whedon is like one of my personal gods. He deserves your recognition, he deserves your attention with everything that he does, and now this project has been on the shelf for quite some time, since it completed production in 2009, and waiting for the unwrangling of all of the mess with MGM, its original studio, going bankrupt. So it was finally purchased and agreed to be distributed by Lionsgate, that makes a number of horror films. The Saw films, they all came out of Lionsgate. Memory serves, I think even the Hostel films might have come out of Lionsgate too, but I could be wrong on that. I'm not really going to check my math on that, but they've done a lot of horror films, a lot of smaller films, but small films that get big attention, like The Expendables and so on and so forth. Some Jason Statham films. And of course, they're in agreement with Marvel to do all of their animated projects, at least as far as the ones that were, like Ultimate Avengers, those films. Anyway, I'm getting way off track here. So, we finally saw it released this Friday the 13th. I saw it today. Now, as Joss himself put it, this was his loving hate letter to horror films. Because basically what he had felt was that horror films, they'd basically just gotten too stale, too predictable. A lot of the kind of, torture porn genre had, just infested, especially back then, in and around 2000, 2007, 2008, when this project was gestating and being written. Now, of course, as far as the people in it are concerned, it features Chris Hemsworth. This was to be, I believe, his first major film, even though not a huge major studio film, because his first major studio film was his role as George Kirk in J.J. Abrams' Star Trek. Then, of course, he went on to play Thor Odinson. That makes it sound Odin's son. And he will be, of course, reprising that role in The Avengers. We also have Kristen Connolly, who I've never heard of before, but apparently she's been on some soap operas, and we have Anna Hutchinson, who played the Yellow Ranger for a little while on Power Rangers. Fran Kranz, who was Topher on Dollhouse, arguably the best character on that show. And you also have great character actors like Richard Jenkins and Bradley Whitford, and Amy Acker also appears in this film, of course, from a lot of the, at least two of the Whedon shows. And let's get to the movie. This movie is fucking awesome. This is easily the best horror film that I've seen since The Mist back in 2007. I adore The Mist. I love it to death. It's awesome. But basically what this is, and it's, a very familiar setup as far as people who haven't seen the film. It's five college kids, all of their kind of various archetypes going to this cabin in the woods and confronting evil while they're there. Now, the cabin itself is very reminiscent of the cabin that's in the first two Evil Dead films, more specifically in Evil Dead 2, because A, that film's just a little bit more recognizable, and B, it just seems to match up a little bit better. And I would have killed if there was a Bruce Campbell cameo somewhere in this film. But anyway, this was essentially, you can see why Joss referred to it as, a loving hate letter, because it examines all of the tropes of modern horror cinema, but then is also a throwback to older horror cinema, but then adds this huge twist. And it's not terribly spoilery if you've seen the trailers or if you've seen the commercial, that essentially it is that there is somebody behind it. This is not just a cabin in the woods where supernatural evil shit happens. It's a cabin in the woods that is being monitored and where these creatures are loosed upon these people. Now, you have, Chris Hemsworth plays the smart jock. You've got Kristen Connolly playing the kind of virginal good girl. You've got Anna Hutchinson playing the kind of slutty, not slutty, but just, she's, vivacious, if you will. You've got Jesse Williams who I'm totally unfamiliar with, who plays Holden, and Holden is kind of the intellectual of the group, the nice, considerate guy, who has a thing for a character of Dana, played by Kristen Connolly, who's essentially the star of the film, and Frank Kranz is the wild, well, not wild, but he's the stoner. He's the comedy relief guy. The guy that you expect to die really soon. And Richard Jenkins, Bradley Whitford, and Amy Acker are all working for this, I won't say company, but I can't say too much without giving the whole, giving away the whole farm here, because this is a very secretive film. It's important to go in without knowing too much about it. But it's just, from the opening on, it keeps up this level of energy that just keeps rising and rising and rising and rising and rising until, because the first two acts, apart from the cutaways to the inside with the characters of Richard Jenkins and Brad Whitford and Amy Acker, you're not really getting something really different. But it's until their role in this is revealed that things get really interesting and really awesome. Because basically, they go down to they go down into the cellar, which looks a lot like the fruit cellar in Evil Dead 2. And there seems to be some kind of, not these kind of, again, these kind of horror tropes. Somebody's, Chris Hemsworth's got this like puzzle well, it's a ball. It's like a puzzle sphere, and there's this twisted little ballerina music box, and there's this like amulet that one was going to put on, and then there's a diary of these like this pain worshipping family that used to live there, and there's this Latin incantation at the bottom, and basically, like I said, I mean, I can't give the whole thing away. I mean, if I say much more, I'm going to be guilty of spoilers. So I don't want to do that, because believe me, you want to see this film mostly with blinders on, because you don't know what's coming, and it's awesome. Are there plot holes? Sure there are. That's been a pretty there seems to be a great disconnect between, because this film has got 93% rating on Rotten Tomatoes of all the 40 odd professional reviewers that have reviewed it, but the audience that's seeing it, I don't think they really get it. Now the crowd that I saw it with, for the most part, the people that I was sitting around, they really got it. They're like, okay, these are people who are into Joss Whedon and Drew Goddard style. Because these two people, they've obviously worked together a lot on various shows. And so I think they understand where the humor's coming from, and where this very high, this and I'm using the word in its exactness, it's a very high concept horror film. And as Joss said, a couple of years ago, he said, this is like no other horror film you've ever seen. And it's not. You've never seen this horror film before. But you have. But you haven't. It's because like I said, it's really about playing with the tropes. And you'll see a lot of this stuff in the commercials about how these different sort of horror characters, these kind of traditional horror characters, play out. And it's hilariously funny. There's some great lines, particularly, I mean, the star of the film really, to me, is Frank Kranz. He's just awesome, brilliant. What a great performance by him. Chris Hemsworth, everybody's very good in it, but it's Frank Kranz who really stands out. And Kristen Connolly, of course, they are kind of the two people that end up having the most impact on the film. And with Frank Kranz's character, kind of smoking weed all the time, he has this bong, this extendable bong that looks like it's like an aluminum coffee cup, but it's one of those things. It's like it's just sheer genius, and how it's utilized in the film is just awesome. And I mean, again, just everybody is spot on exactly what they need to be. There is very heavy gore once it gets into the third act. Before that's pretty slow going as far as the gore itself is concerned, but there are some very scary moments throughout the film. And once you get to the third act, it is just absolute, perfectly orchestrated mayhem. And it's unbelievable. Goddard really outdid the work that he did on Cloverfield in directing this film. The script, like I said, it's almost beyond, it's almost perfect. I mean, the film itself is really about as close to perfect of a horror film as you can get, without being totally nihilistic. Because there's this attitude about the film that the film has, even though it does reach into some very dark places, it still does it with a very, very, very major nod and a wink and a smile. There's nothing that feels terribly serious here, but there is, like I said, there's some serious shit that goes down. So I have to say, this is, out of my scoring scale, it's a 4.5 out of 5, leaning pretty damn close to 5. There were some moments that seemed a little bit, they need to be fine-tuned a little bit, but other than that, just wow. I could have sat through it again immediately following. I wish my wife liked it as much as I did, because I'd probably go back next weekend. But anyway, so Cabin in the Woods, Go see it. Knock fucking Hunger Games off the top spot, okay? So this is me, James Donnelly, telling you I'm reviewing shit. I reviewed Cabin in the Woods. Cabin in the Woods, 4.5 out of 5. Great fucking movie. Go see it. Goodbye.